this time, we're going to move directly into our talk because I don't want to cut you off for lunch, just saying. We have Ashley Fuchs. See, I said it right. And she's going to be talking about chromatic type, new technologies, integrations, and explorations of form making for letterpress printing. She comes to us from the University of Montana. Give her a warm welcome. Thank you.
Hi, thank you so much for having me today. I'm very excited to talk about this project called Chromatic Type, New Explorations and Integrations and Explorations of Form Making for Letterpress Printing. And I'm really more so excited just to be here to be able to share the amazing outcomes from my student work. Just a little bit of a background, I'm a tenure track professor at Montana State University. Sorry, go Cats, not go Grizz. I'm going to jump right into it now. So the premise and the overview is simple. In groups, students were required to conceptualize, digitally design, physically produce, and letterpress print chromatic type. I'm giving you a little sneak peek of what some of the final results were, and during this presentation, I'm going to be discussing in depth the project requirements, their process work, the creation of new forms, actual letterpress printing, and the final student outcomes. So I wanted to share where we are in the world. Most of you might know Montana from Yellowstone, maybe Kevin Costner. But this is where Bozeman is located. We're very close to Yellowstone National Park. This is where I work, where I live, where I teach. It doesn't look like this. Usually it's really snowy. But more so, this is a group of students that I get to teach. They're a lively group, a lot of them coming from in-state, wanting to ski, wanting to be outdoors, but actually just really curious about graphic design and the world around them. And I wanted to talk a little bit about our studio, because I think it's important to mention. We have 3 letterpress presses in the studio. We have an Asburn, which is kind of unique, because it stems from Germany. We have a Vandercook number 4. We have a CMP 10 by 15, which is a platen press. We have around 19 cabinets of metal type, which is around 400 cases. And we have 24 cases of wood type, but we have around 40 typefaces of wood. And by no surprise, we are, of course, the smallest room in the School of Art, because computers are more important. But what I think is really important and impressive about our studio, it's an active learning environment, not only for students. We do public workshops, and this is actually a student and her mom who came to participate in a public workshop where they learn how to set one line of type, and they print the line of type, and it's actually helping us document our type specimens, which is pretty awesome. And this is a really happy participant, and this is a favorite thing about what I do. People love to print, and I love to share in the joy of printing with them. I also wanted to share a little bit about my personal teaching philosophy, which incorporates this idea of learning through making and exploring content through iteration and the experiment of materiality. This construct of interaction reflects my pedagogical approach in the classroom. I encourage learning through explorations where students build these meaningful connections. My curriculum embodies the statement, I make, I do, I interact. I believe the role of the teacher is that of facilitator. I advise my students on the importance of thinking critically through process, showing them that their hands are more than objects that type on a keyboard. They're tools for thinking and vessels for molding, building, and experimenting. I teach students to engage in these creative problem-solving processes, reframing experiences as an experiment, as an interaction, and as an opportunity to learn. So you'll see these concepts emerge throughout the presentation, and especially with the process of making and exploring new forms to print with. So as a little background on this project, just some, talking points. It's a 5-week project. That also included 1 week of spring break. Yes, I did give them homework over spring break. Because of the intensity of work that is assigned, both in conceptualization and physical making of this chromatic scheme, students worked in groups of 3 for a total of 3 student groups. So I only have 9 students enrolled in the class right now. Students engage in a process that's fully orientated approach that includes required research, presentation on historic wood type, conceptualization of type, and mainly the process of actually making these new type forms to print with. Another key aspect of the project is creating the chromatic effect in printing, where they're required to explore and engage in multiple processes, including a historic study, research, sketch conceptualization, and most importantly, relevance of the type design to a local cause of their choosing, and of course, making sure that it actually functions as a chromatic typeface and can be printed using letterpress machines. So I wanted to make sure that the goals of the project were clear and highlighted the outcomes that students could understand how they would be integrating these various tools and technologies and why it's important to participate in this form of critical making. The first goal is obviously to be able to experience digital form design, specifically using Illustrator to design their new typefaces and create a physical reality with the aid of laser cutting. The second goal is to actually produce the updated historic chromatic wood type forms, and in doing so, students would actually learn the correct materials to build with and how to create these ATypI forms. So this ATypI magical number for us is 0.918 inches, and as a result, too low of a form would actually not print on the press, and too high of a form could actually damage the press and the type. So it's really important to get to this magical number. And it's not only important to learn how to cut these forms out with digital technologies, but also how to finish them and make them functional in the press. And the third goal is also to introduce students to historic wood type from 1828 to 1900, and for them to have a proficient understanding of the formal qualities of typefaces, as their experience and interactions with type is not just digital, but to update shapes, forms, and layout to better align with their chosen social justice cause that they'd be printing from and for. And so a resource that we use is American Wood Type, 1828 to 1900 by Rob Roy Kelly. He has a fantastic exploration of the collection in this book. And also as a resource, we use specimens of chromatic wood type, Borders by Esther K. Smith. Not only does it have borders in it, but it also has examples of historic chromatic type in use. And also, students were required to research and use resources across websites that have scanned historic specimen books. So, for example, this one's coming from the specimens printing types from Austin Wood & Co. in London. And the final goal, of course, it's not only to know how to print, but it's also to be aware and mindful of what you're saying in print. So it was required that students are going to print for a local cause, and students were able to choose what causes they wanted to print for. As a result, a lot of students are actually printing for Bozeman housing crisis, environmental rights, or even advocating for voting. Once students have printed their type specimen sheets, they use the type to print for their individual cause. So this process and project is really a revival of old methods of printing, new ATypI forms merged with new technologies of digital fabrication to create the new forms. So this process can have a huge impact and influence on the sphere of making and authorship in the new era. Specifically, it asks and answers questions like, how do digital fabrication technologies merged with antiquated printing methods like letterpress lend themselves to rhetoric and speech in the digital era? Lastly, how can critical making with these various printing and fabrication technologies change the voice and tone of what is being said? Wood type has had a significant history in America. It's really covetable, it's light, it's impactful, and most importantly, it has these unique character traits from years of use. So it's not out of the ordinary to wonder what has been said with this single typeface. Wood type is scarcely made today due to the loss of knowledge and skilled craftsmen. So most of what we are left with comes from forms of identification books and active letterpress printers in small studios. However, it's unlikely to ever be mass-produced at the scale that it once was. Because wood type is so covetable, this provides an incentive to incorporate accessible technologies to recreate letter forms using a variety of materials to create new ATypI forms, making historic practices relevant in the modern era. So the reason that I designed and executed this project was to help educate and inform students about the history and importance of letterpress, but also proving that through making in multiple forms, the course is relevant through integration of current interdisciplinary practices. So I'm going to walk you through the step-by-step kind of processes that these students went through research, digital creation, actually cutting, assembling, and printing. So I just wanted to point out as a really quick background, we talked a little bit as a group about what some of these histories look like with wood type, and it's actually kind of really fun to see that wood type came in these various different schemes from 3A, lowercase and uppercase. You can also see how many figures and numbers you would be getting in each scheme. And this was important to talk to students about what kind of schemes they would be making in, and this comes from the Hamilton Wood Type Catalog, number 14 in 1889. This is also another interesting example from this wood type catalog. It says here wood type increases and decreases in direct proportion. 8 line size is twice as wide and printing face is twice as heavy as 4 line size. So this information is really interesting to start talking to students about of how they would physically make wood type. A direct comparison here from Hamilton to Page, it's also interesting to see how Hamilton skips certain pica line sizes, like there's no 7, 11, 13, so on and so forth. But in Page, there was a 7 line, so we like to talk about this as identification purposes and making. Also, I start talking to them about actual physical forms and making, so for example, this Z. When we talk about wood type, it's really interesting to note how to make it functionally to print. So you can see that the Z is the baseline to cap height of the actual block. Another interesting thing to look at is that most letter forms are in these very regimented units in pica. So this is an 11 wide Z. It's not like 11.125. So that leads us into the actual process of the students. After discussing these historical processes and considerations, they were assigned multiple type styles to research, so each student had one style. These come from David Shields, the Rob Roy Kelly American Wood Type Collection, A History and Catalog, which is a really fantastic resource. He likes to joke it's 7 pounds, so you can use it for multiple things, but it does have really fantastic cataloging of this collection from the RRK collection, which is at the University of Texas in Austin. After they were assigned the style, they discussed in depth what this typeface style was, and they were required to find 3 historic examples, and they used this resource, the Typographic Library, which has some amazing catalogs of different type specimen books. So warning, this is now a presentation inside of a presentation. These are some examples from the student research presentations. This student presented on Gothic Tuscan. You can see that they're highlighting the unique attributes of what makes the typeface the typeface. They're also showing the different examples of it that they're finding from the historic type specimen books. And then they're also talking about what kind of important local causes they want to design for. And I just want to point out that in our tiny town of around 50,000, the median home cost in March of 2024 is around $979,000, which is $52,000 more than Seattle, which is absolutely insane. So a lot of students are questioning, how do I rent here? How do I survive here? What does life look like after college? They're also required to sketch, so they're sketching a lot of different iterations for what their type design could be. Through further process explorations, students also began to work on what chromatic forms would look like on their typeface. And after these initial research presentations, they were assigned into their groups of 3, and they're working on causes together. Obviously, once they're in their groups, they start working through their letter form design, and they're assigned to do this in segments. So 5, 15, then the entire typeface, and considering the chromatic together. While working, we're printing out and we're critiquing their work and looking for extreme details and consistency in the typeface that they're designing. So these are the 3 groups that we're looking at. This is them together in class, critiquing. And students were required to make this kind of template Illustrator file that had all these different kind of formal qualities of type. Because they're working in a group, a main consideration and concern is consistency in the group. Once we go through all of these critiques, we start looking at the designs together in both chromatic and the regular letter form, and they are designing all of this in Illustrator. So here are a couple of examples. Of course, we go through more iterations and rounds of feedback, and they're getting closer and closer to the final results. once they're ready, they're actually going to laser cut their forms. So I give them an Illustrator template to use in Adobe Illustrator, and they take their template over into the laser cutting room and they actually start laser cutting. The materials that students can use to laser cut are plexi, hardboard, or wood. Due to the extra step of wood sealing and the cost effectiveness of hardboard, all groups use the hardboard material, which is a high density fiber board, and it's an engineered wood product. The hardboard here is 1/8 of an inch thick, and this is important in making ATypI forms. We have 1/8 inch hardboard, 1 ply of chipboard, and 3/4 inch MDF board that creates an extremely accurate ATypI form. So we can see that the students are laser cutting and getting these forms made out of hardboard. Once they're done, we blue tape them so they don't lose any materials, and they have the luxury of bringing them back and taking the tape off and organizing them. And so this group organized in both the final letter form and the chromatic layer. And I wanted to briefly talk about the building process, because this is actually like the meat and bones of this project, and it's important to know how to assemble. So these laser cut forms are, like I talked about, out of 1/8 inch of a material. They're attached to 3/4 inch MDF with a single ply of 0.04 inch chipboard attached to the bottom, which gets us really close to 0.918. After these are adhered to the MDF, the yellow I'm showing here is like you can use the negative of the laser cut as your template to get it accurately aligned on your block. They glue it with wood glue. They put it into a press, ideally for 30 minutes. And then if you use wood, you need an extra step of a light sand and a shellac spray so that the wood does not absorb the ink. So I have all of this kind of visualized for you here. So this is Sam. You're going to see a lot of Sam. He's actually laser cutting the MDF. He's very excited. This is what the MDF looks like. So this is the MDF that they had to cut for all of their forms, both the regular letters and the chromatic. Of course, they are also laser cutting their chipboard. I love this in-process look. This is what all the negative looks like once they get the hardboard out. This is kind of the students assembling and making and pulling out their chromatic layers and the negatives of things that they don't necessarily need. So again, this is the hardboard material. They're also taking a moment to lightly sand the back of the hardboard before applying glue. It makes it easier to stick to the MDF material itself. So the students are like group and batch tasking this, which is really nice to see. So this is a student actually taking the MDF, and she's using the negative to align it better to the block, and then she's pre-sanded, and she's gonna dab it on with some wood glue, attach it to the back of the block. And once it's assembled and attached, of course, it goes into our wonderful nipping presses here. If you don't have these, any big stack of books will work easily. And what we get is the start of new wood type that we can print with. And they were able to make a manicule for extra credit, but they're calling this a womanacule. Yes. Okay, so once the forms were made, it was time to print. So the printing forms are assembled backwards, right to left on a galley tray, and then slid into the bed of the press. The inking for this printing process is really important. They have to use transparent ink in order to get the chromatic effect. If they were to use white opaque ink, you would get a knockout effect, which is what we don't want. So here's the form in the bed of the press. I will admit, some of these forms are more beautifully locked up than others. So this is one team printing the first layer, which is the blue. And then, of course, the second layer, which is the yellow, which is where all the magic happens. And this is the final result. So the chromatic in here is the green, which is created by the yellow and the blue. And I'll talk more about what the concept behind this is in a second. Here's one more group. Again, Sam, he is going to print. This is him happy again. And this is their chromatic layer. This group was very outgoing. Their chromatic layer is extremely thin, which did lead to some heartache, but rather successful. This is the chromatic layer. And the last thing that they're required to do, which you can see here, is they're required to name their typeface, print the line size, the group members' names, and also the date created. So I just want to take a moment here to highlight the final outcomes in detail. So this group is called Height Sans. As a side note, yes, we do know it's not chromatic, and they know. And it was discussion that led to some miscommunication amongst their groups, but they have a beautiful typeface. Okay, so Height Sans is designed on a satire on high-end apartment buildings in Bozeman, and the typeface seen on those buildings. The goal for our typeface was to mimic and sort of poke fun at the type of sleek, rounded house numbers that are posted on the multi-million-dollar dwellings around Bozeman and the surrounding Gallatin Valley. Our typeface has very wide counters and bowls with high stroke contrast and low crossbars, qualities that we observed in our research prior to designing. The name Height Sans comes from the cliche of naming tall apartment buildings the heights, or adjective associated with height. The colors chosen relate to the brassier modern black house numbers of existing properties in the surrounding area. This is Rialto Tuscan. This group designed typeface, which was made at 15 line. It's the creation of this typeface. They took inspiration from historic wood type styles and historic buildings in Bozeman. The influence via local is a nod to the history of our city in contrast to what it has become today with huge population booms and housing crises. The chromatic effect was meant to resemble the chrome striping that is seen on the Rialto building, and the fancy bifurcated serifs and long, elegant letter forms create a polished look that contrasts Bozeman's rural and rugged history. The use of varying strokes for different elements of type enhances this effect and comments on the influx of wealthy new residents driving costs that are now unsustainable for the common Montana resident and college student. As a quick background, the Rialto, originally erected in 1908 as a storefront and a US post office, became the theater in 1924. And the theater was renowned for its silent film screenings, and the Art Deco marquee brought a little bit of glitz onto Main Street. So we can see their influence, right, from this very utilitarian building to now like this luxury, glitzy glamour space in Bozeman. And the last group, this is called MT Topo. It's a chromatic typeface that showcases the topography of our unique towns and locations across the state of Montana. The letters are an impactful block form with smooth lines and curved terminals and stems. The typographic lines are highlighted through the addition of the chromatic layer, which, you know, traditional colors in Montana at MSU are also blue and gold, so that's how they're choosing their colors. The typeface aligns with multiple of our group members' print causes, including supporting local businesses, preserving the Yellowstone National Park, and honoring the elders in our community. Thus, this typeface is rooted in the local and connecting to place and an embodiment of local identity. So a key outcome, and something I want to leave you with, is this takeaway, that through the integration of new technologies with historic print mediums, students reconsider the values of design through content and the meditative process of making by hand. So you can find out more about the next steps, because they are currently, while I'm away, designing their poster for their local cause, and they're going to use this typeface as a headline. You can follow them and their process on our Instagram page, courier.press. And I also want to be very transparent in one key takeaway. On this group, and all of the groups in particular, a lot of them forgot that we have to flip type. So, of course, they were laser cut, and you can actually use the back, but what happened to the hardboard is this really interesting, weird effect where the edging is not crisp and not perfect, so it's a little bit rugged, it's a little bit ragged. This group, though, did flip the typeface, and you can see how clean and consistent this hardboard printing is. So I just wanted to throw this out there, because I think it's important that not only is this a really great example of what is being done, but we're still learning from it, and we're still engaging in this process, and only through this process we can explore what really works with these different materials that we're printing with. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. At this time, I think we only have time for 2 questions. So okay. Since you caught my eye first.
Thank you so much, Ashley, for opening the hood on your studio and being so generous about how you led to that spot with your students. I think, as an educator myself, who just also recently redid our press space in the basement. I would love to hear a little bit about the level the students are, the context in which this project is occurring. Is it a core studio? Is it like a letterpress class? Might you share a little bit about this as well?
Yeah, of course. So I'm really lucky that letterpress and screen printing is actually in the graphic design curriculum. It's not a part of printmaking. So by getting the job at MSU, I got to teach it, which was really exciting. This group of students is in their junior year at Montana State University, and this is part of their graphic design core junior block that they have to take. There's multiple classes available, and they get to choose what theme. So, brand identity, publication, so on. This lives within that. It's a 5-credit class. We meet for 2 days a week from 1:10 to 5 p.m. So we're together for a really long time. And I also offer classes that are 1-credit quick fire classes in letterpress. Those only meet for 4 weeks out of the semester. But this project is their second to last project in letterpress. And they have traditionally never been introduced to it before this class.
Thank you. One more question.
How did you come up with this particular technology for making wood type?
That's a great question. I, by no means, am the sole inventor of it. I learned a lot from Scott Moore of Moore Wood Type in the United States. He is laser cutting not only, he is literally milling down end grain maple to 0.918, and then he's laser cutting it, which is amazing. He talked about a more inclusive approach, which uses wood, plywood sheets on MDF with chipboard. And I've iterated on it to let them explore different materials that's not wood, because they have to go through the extra step of sanding and shellacking. And so we've actually had a lot of success in using 1/8 inch plexi and also the hardboard when reflected. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Ashley is here for the duration of the conference, so grab her, talk to her, and I'm sure she'd love to collaborate.
Thank you.
So at this time,